Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 3 of P2 India Mutual Fund presents Live Mint, Amend, Adjust and Adapt. This is a series of high-powered virtual panel discussions where we unravel the success mantras for the new normal and try and look at what the roadmap should be for us in a post-COVID world. I know post-COVID world doesn't seem to be appearing anywhere in the immediate future. We're seeing the number of cases that are still rising. But it's good to spend this time trying to figure out what needs to be done for India and for the world as we finally emerge from COVID. Now, I'm Vikram Chandra. I'm the founder of Veritagy. Today, we're going to be looking at the topic of policy and reforms. India has been more fiscally conservative, perhaps, during this period than many other countries around the world have been. Is that just because we are keeping our powder dry, or is it because we don't believe in gains as much as some of the other countries might?
No, Vikram, I think the government has spent a lot of resources in the rural economy. The government has spent a lot of resources in putting money directly into the hands of the farmers. The government is spending a lot of money on infrastructure across each one of these sectors. The road, the rail, the highways, all these sectors. And I am quite clear that, a series of schemes which the government has started. I mean, look at the production-linked incentive scheme for mobiles, for instance, which has brought in, attracted, Apple and Samsung and all the manufacturers of Apple, Wistron, Foxconn, Pegatron, all of them coming into India in a big way. And my belief, my very strong belief is that the production-linked incentive scheme for both mobile, electronics, API, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, all of them will drive India's growth. The supply chain globally will get disrupted in a very big way away from China. And I'm a strong believer that all the leading manufacturers of the world will have a China plus one strategy. They can't get out of China immediately, but they'll look at alternatives. Vietnam is too small. It doesn't have a large domestic market. It doesn't have a very big labor force. There is no other place other than India for a vast domestic market and using it as a springboard for exports. The challenge, however, for India is that while it does all this, the states now must become very, very easy and simple. We must do away with a lot of, while we've jumped up 79 positions in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business, it's important that every single Indian state must, as a mission, become more and more easy and simple and emulate what the center has done.
What in your mind, Mr. Deepak, is it that India has to do? Because it should be a well thought out, well articulated strategy. So here are the big pain points. This is what we're doing to remove the pain points.
Vikram, let me attempt to build a framework on how to go about it. I think the key thing is prioritization. Everyone agrees that urgency is of essence, and we are not a rich country. In spite of everything, we have multiple demands on funds, so we have to prioritize. And at the same time, we want long-term policy stability. As far as India is concerned, again, we are very competitive in certain areas, globally competitive, whether it's pharma or whether it's textiles, electronic, mobile devices, certain agriculture, exports, seafood, spices. I mean, there are automobiles, small automobiles, very competitive. And these are areas which we need to build as champion sectors and ensure that companies working in these areas become even more competitive.
Consistency in our labor laws is something which is extremely important, and the entire concept of the SEZs, because I was handling some of this in the state government on the other side as an officer looking after industrial development. So the entire concept of SEZs was built around trying to insulate and creating policies and a policy framework where the foreign investor would feel comfortable and which would not be amenable to the vicissitudes of state government policies. So it was a pretty robust framework. And I remember even at that time trying to change labor laws, which met with resistance at the central level. Today, we have a far more conducive environment. So SEZs should be allowed to actually have foreign investors convenient or foreign investor friendly labor laws, and also the land use planning of SEZs needs to be changed and modified to suit investment needs of foreign investors, so as they are encouraged to develop their manufacturing zones as complete cities. I mean, these are not just industrial estates like a HSIDC, Industrial Area Development Authority. They are complete. If you go to, for instance, Suzhou or any of these SEZs in China, they're complete cities in themselves. So they have residential areas, they have clubs, they have pubs, they have multiplexes and so on. So it's a complete life within a life, which will encourage a foreign investor to feel that he's almost replicated his country's environment in your land.
Mr. Ghosh, you want to add anything to that template and those panel of suggestions that were coming up on how this can be done?
No, I think I have also said the same thing in the beginning. You need to look into the infrastructure. The one more thing which I need to add is that we need to also cut the logistic costs, because in Indian context, if you look into the data and compare with the ease of doing business of India and China, India, the cost is significantly on the lower side, but from the ports, when you download the items, the number of days which it comes to come back to the hinterland, that is absolutely much more than what it does in China. So basically we also need to cut the logistic cost, and that could be done only by building up the infrastructure. The other things which I mentioned in the beginning is being reforms in the power sector, because this has been crying for reforms now for the several years, and that is one of the problems also impacting the banking sector. The infrastructure sector, we have already talked about them. And the other important thing which I'd like to mention, I think one of the panelists says, that is the National Infrastructure Program, which has been rolled out by the government, that envisages an amount of 111 lakh crores. And that envisages 30% participation from the private sector. So until and unless you make your policies attractive, that 30% is not going to materialize.
If we do 50% of the things that this panel has suggested over the last 45, 50 minutes, you'll probably have a $10 trillion economy within 3 years. So yes, I mean, we've been hearing some really good ideas. Just wanted to ask you, on the entire point of capital market reforms that was spoken about, what would be some of the items that you would look at? And also, it's very clear that one of the biggest reforms that we've been talking about for the last 15 to 20 years was, why doesn't the government privatize? Why don't you disinvest? Why don't you, list public sector entities? It was interesting actually that the finance minister, during that economic package that was announced, one of the most major things that she said, that the government wants to get out of everything. The government doesn't want to be present, maybe a player in one company in every strategic sector. Otherwise, we want to be out of it. The question is, you need a lot of buoyancy in the stock markets and a lot of money coming into the stock markets to be able to absorb that much disinvestment.
I think the very, very valid point, but I think we need to also appreciate what is actually happening in the market. Now, first, India is a capital-starved market, and capital is essential for growth. Also, interestingly, Indians are savers by nature. And in the recent past, we've actually seen more people shifting to financial assets versus physical assets, whether it is moving to FDs and deposits, or even unproductive assets like gold. So there is a clear shift towards financial assets. And if you look at what happened in the other countries versus where we are, we will see this trend going further. Share of financial assets will grow up. But most of this is actually getting captured in the private sector right now. So I think there is a big disconnect today in terms of what market believes about PSUs versus a private sector which is not dependent on government. So market is willing to pay a huge premium for companies that have good business model and that have good governance. Whereas I think market has question marks on both this aspect when it comes to government.